is day 8 of the 12 Days of Birth Stories, and today we're going to have Holly sharing with us her totally normal radical home birth. And what's really funny is that it's not radical at all, right? That's the irony of all of this, is that her birth is just a normal thing that we are so excited to talk about, especially after having a couple of hospital birth stories. I'm really excited to have this home birth story in the mix. So let's bring in Holly. Entry into bringing someone into the live. Fingers crossed. Forgot to knock on wood. There we go. Oh gosh. So anything goes in these lives. I've got let's try again. I've got 2 big dogs. There is a big tanker or something outside. I don't know, doing something with the pipes. So anything goes. Okay. Let me make sure, Holly. Give us a minute. Okay. Go live with Holly. It's weird that it doesn't work. It's so annoying. Are you seeing anything on my end, Holly? We are just getting organized with actually getting her in the live. Okay, it said unable to join, so I'm going to try again. This happens with everybody. I thought it was going to be super smooth. If you have any questions for Holly once we get her on here, pop them in the chat. There we go.
Oh,
Officially. Pop them in the chat as we talk. Okay. And yeah, we'll do our best to acknowledge any of the questions. How are you feeling?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I had a very passionate conversation with one of our other radical moms this morning, so I'm all like hyped up on that energy.
Exciting. That's always exciting. Can you hear me
Yes,
okay?
I can. And I feel like
Okay.
you're a little bit fuzzy for me, but I can hear you fine.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Perfect.
So do you
Well,
want to introduce yourself?
yeah. So my name is Holly, and I am a third-time mama to 3 beautiful girls. And this last birth was a beautiful home birth, radical birth. Just really a healing spiritually, emotionally, physically, everything, kind of a closure to, that opening of motherhood, and now that kind of closing to it. So it's really been a beautiful 15-year journey in the making.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's so interesting. So what are the ages of your kiddos?
So I have a 15-year-old daughter, an 11-year-old, and a 1-year-old now. So a nice spread.
Yes, a fun dynamic. I'm sure with all girls too.
Oh, it's so much fun. So much fun. I mean, I feel like I have my 2 older girls, and then I feel now like we have another only child, definitely, but I'm sure over time that'll change as well. But it's been a lot of fun.
I was dealing with some things with my daughter today, and I like up until this point, she's 10 and a half. Up until this point, I was like, I don't know, there aren't that many differences between girls and boys, but wow, we've hit a new level of things that I've never dealt with before that are
That is just
very girly.
funny. Yes, definitely, especially at that stage.
Yeah.
I remember when my girls were younger on the playground, just seeing all the other boys playing, and I was like, oh my gosh, are they okay? Like, what's going on? And the moms are like, oh no, they're just boys. I'm like, oh, okay, my girls don't play like that.
There are these funny little differences that creep up, and you're like, wow, yeah, my
Yeah.
friend has boys. She doesn't deal with these things.
Oh
So,
yeah, it's
very
crazy,
interesting.
crazy.
So, you tell us what led to, did you have a home birth with your older ones? What led to this decision to have a home birth with your youngest?
Yeah, so it's interesting because if you ask my oldest right now, she would say, well, it's such a trend, mom, and that's why you did it because it was a trend. But
Funny.
roll back 15 years, which I think is important to just kind of quickly go through where I came from and how I got
Yeah.
to this decision to have a free birth. Um, 15 years ago, 16 years ago now, I guess it would have been, I had a client who came in who had said that she had a doula. I was like, what's this concept of a doula? She goes, yeah, I had a doula. So I had emotional support, which was amazing. And I birthed at home. And at this point, I'm like, what do you mean you birthed at home? Like in my mind, I'm having a C-section and a tummy tuck after because I don't
Mm,
want to wreck my body. And that's if I
yeah.
actually have kids. So very ignorant in my early 20s, knew nothing about birth besides what you saw on TV, and everything was scary and birth was horrible. And why would you want to feel that pain? So I
Yeah.
was inquisitive and I said, tell me a little bit more. This is really interesting. I find that so fascinating. And she goes, well, yeah, I was afraid of tearing. So I had a water birth at home and the hospitals didn't allow for that. I was like, well,
Hmm.
gosh, if I ever had children someday, I want to be in the water. That would be amazing. Flash forward a year, I ended up pregnant. And that was my first thought is I need to be at home in the water and I need to have one of those doulas. So I get pregnant, everything changes. All of a sudden, I'm like, I need to learn more about birth. I watched The Business of Being Born. I
Hmm.
hired a midwife. At the time, we were actually living out in Oshawa. This was like 2009. Hired a midwife. They were lovely. Still didn't know a lot about birth at that point. Just really was new to it. Just kind of knew that I wanted to be in the water so I didn't tear.
Yeah.
So went through that whole process, educated myself as much as I could back then. Honestly, there weren't a lot of resources, 15, 16 years ago. It
Yeah.
was very sparse. And if you did have resources, everybody told you how crazy it was and how it was conspiracy theory. So then we
Yeah.
moved in the
That
middle of my
film, that film, The Business of Being Born, that was huge at the time. Like, I
huge.
think
It
it's
was. It was
important
like
to
our only
contextualize.
resource.
Yes, it was the only
Yeah,
alternative voice in the mix, but it also
absolutely.
came from an American perspective of healthcare.
Yes.
So, which made
So,
it like applicable sort of to us, but not
which is
fully. So
so
still,
interesting because at the time we lived in Canada. Then 6 months into my pregnancy, we moved to California. So
uh-huh.
I had no idea, even how much more intense the US system was and actually how similar they actually are. Like, really, at the end of the day, we're basically a little mini United States. That's the reality of it, especially when it comes to C-section rates and when it comes to a lot of the practices that we do see in the hospitals now. So we moved to the States. I hired at that point like an off-grid midwife. She was a lay midwife. She was traditionally trained from Texas. Sweetest lady. She would come sit on the couch, talk to me for 45 minutes to an hour, go through, some basic education. But she encouraged me at the time to go to a Lamaze class and hire a doula. So at that point, we found Lisa, who was a heaven sent. She was my doula with my first two births while she was becoming a midwife. And honestly, she was like my rock next to my husband during labor. She was amazing. And I remember at one point, so I still had in my mind, I wanted a home birth at this point because I started learning about the system and I was like, oh, birth should be natural. Birth is holistic. Birth is a rite of passage. It's a portal of, beautiful, the ethers between the two worlds. So but I wasn't prepared. I was not prepared. I tried hypnobirthing, couldn't get into it. Went into labor and had a really, really tough. It was like a 56-hour long labor when it was all said and done. My midwife left. She attended somebody else's birth. She came back. They brought a secondary, midwife. My doula was there. My husband was amazing. We call him Doodla because he really is a doula. He was
Cute.
incredible. But it was long. It was a long process. I had everybody there. My whole family was there. It was almost like a spectator event, which at the end of the day, I was young, I was naive, I just didn't know. She was coming out. Unfortunately, she stalled out and just wouldn't come out any further. So I had her head right there, ready to go. I just was exhausted. I was spent. And at one point, my midwife had pulled me out of the tub and said, you know what? I really think that it's time to transfer. It's been too long. I am concerned with the heart tones and I'm concerned with the fact that she might be stuck. So I think it warrants a transfer. So this is like in the middle of they had these races, they had to shut all the roads down and we could not, we were
Um,
trying to figure out at like midnight how to get to the hospital. Well, everything shut down. It was just this
the
crazy,
baby's
like
head on
dramatic.
your
My
leg.
husband forgot his shoes in the house. I'm literally like in the middle of the car with this baby's head between my legs. I get
Oh
to the
my God.
hospital, they put me on a gurney, and all I remember is literally this like doctor screaming at me, going, "You wanted a home birth and you're gonna get one. You push this baby out." And I don't know, her hands were up there so far. I was crazy, but I had her. Totally
Yeah.
traumatized. came out of that like it was crazy. And right after that, they came in the middle of the night and they actually had given her, so I didn't know in the States as well that they give the hepatitis B vaccine immediately afterwards. So they gave her this vaccine. She ended up having a massive reaction to it, ended up in the NICU.
Mm.
So it was like insult to injury. Already didn't want to be in the hospital. Here I'm now in the hospital. Now my baby's had a vaccine injury. Now she's in the NICU, hooked up to all this equipment and everything. It was very, very scary. We got through it. It
Yeah.
was amazing. Honestly, after that, my husband looked at me. He's like, we're never doing a home birth again. We're not having any more kids. We're done. Like, this was insane. And I was totally on board. This is why
Yeah.
we had 4 years between our first two. So then flash forward 4 years later, 3 years later, I said to my husband, I want another one. He's like, you're crazy. Why would you want to do that? Did you see what you went through before? Clearly, your body's not made for having babies, but I will support you,
Mm.
love you, and I'll do whatever you want. So hired a midwife again. And he's like, why would you want to do that? I go, because I don't want to be in the hospital. And at this point, I had actually become so passionate about the birthing experience that I became a doula myself. And I
Yeah.
really just attended like my clients' births and things like that. I loved it more from an educational standpoint because I felt that there wasn't enough out there. And I wanted to learn
Hmm.
everything there was possible. So that was really cool, kind of coming from a different experience this time. Unfortunately, though, at 14 weeks, I thought I was having a miscarriage. I started like hemorrhaging. So I had to transfer care to a doctor, and then in comes all of the emotional abusive garbage that I just really didn't want. I want to check you, me saying, I don't think you need to check me. Well, how's it any different than you being with your husband? I'm like, well, that's a private thing. And that has nothing to do with you checking me, like back and forth to the point to where at the end of that birth, I stayed home as long as possible. I was like 8 centimeters with my doula. We
Yeah.
called her prodromal labor, that whole 24 hours of just, oh, am I in labor? Am I not in labor? Get to the
Yeah.
hospital. I was like 8 centimeters dilated, had her, immediately had to go into the OR because I had a full blown placental accreta. So
Okay.
the placenta had grown deeply into the uterus. So that had to be manually removed. So they had said at that point, we're just going to give you something just to take the edge off. They fully intubated me. I was out for like hours. I don't even remember. I finally came to, and it was like,
Um,
where am I? What's going on? Multiple blood transfusions. Again, just like a crazy experience. I'm like, this is not birth. This is insane. And I
yeah.
just felt really robbed of that experience to birth, and to experience birth as a whole. And both of them, even though no drugs involved, no other issues or anything, actually by the end of my second, I was screaming for an epidural. Oh my gosh. I was
Hmm.
just like
Hmm.
mentally out of it, which she was literally on her way out, and that was probably why. But when you're in the hospital, it's so easy to be like, just give me an epidural. Oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
can't take this anymore. Fentanyl, I don't care. I
Yeah.
know the risks and the
Whatever.
benefits. You go to a different place. So after that birth, I was done. I was done. The doctor came in. He said, I had to do a lot of tissue removal. The chances of you having another pregnancy are going to be pretty low. I
Yeah.
just, I think that you're done. And I was emotionally and physically, I was just done. I was
Yeah.
like, clearly my body's not made for this. So time went on. I traveled a lot for work. We were back and forth between the States and Canada. And then COVID hit. And
Mhm.
I think when COVID hit, I really realized for years after trying to move up that corporate ladder and trying to grow my businesses, I realized what was most important, and that truly was my family. And I always felt that emptiness of that third baby that I really, really did want, but I just never said anything. And I told a few people, but very few.
Yeah.
Because I just thought, well, maybe I'm crazy. And then for a little while, I thought, well, maybe I'm being called to go back into birth work because when we moved to Canada, I considered going back to school for midwifery. But
Yeah.
I just found that it was very political and a lot of the midwives were burnt out. And from what I was hearing out there, I just thought, you know what? I don't want to be involved in something that I'm not truly passionate about, that I can, help make a change. And I just felt like it was very difficult in that system to make a change, and maybe different now, but I don't think so. Um, so I thought, well, maybe I'm being called to be a TBA. I don't know. So I signed up for Billy Harrigan's TBA course and was super excited about that. And then at the same time, I told my husband, I think I want another baby. And he's like, what? You like have to be out of your mind. Like, I'm in my 50s now. You're almost 40. This is crazy. Our kids are like they could, be on
Um,
their own for a little bit and we're okay. Why would we do this again? And I'm like, I don't know. I am being called to have another baby. I can't tell you what it is. I have no clue. So we started on that journey and, it was tough at the beginning. We did have a miscarriage in there, which was really tough. It's definitely an emotional blow when you don't expect it. And, fertility had never been an issue. So that was a lot to wrap our heads around.
yeah.
I'm very emotional, very, very emotional. But I think it also was part of the path to, again, further educate myself. And this was while I was going through part of the TBA course as well, to educate myself on the importance of nutrition, the importance of supplementation, the importance of food for fertility. So I really got into a lot of the Lily Nichols work, um, Real Food for Pregnancy. And I absolutely love her work, both from a fertility standpoint and from nutrition for pregnancy. I also started researching, oh my gosh, so many different things out there, Dr. O'Reilly, there's so many different ones. At one point, so I did end up getting pregnant. I even created myself. So in 2022, no, 2023, I created this beautiful chart here.
Oh, it's so
And
cool.
my dream birth was this one right here.
Oh, look at
I
that. There
am
she is.
big into the laws of attraction, and what you put back or what you put out there will come back to you. And that was really, really kind of a passion project for me. So I didn't know whether that was being called more into the birthing world or if it was more being called into,
Mhm.
having another baby. I just didn't really know at that time. So I thought we'll try both and we'll see what sticks. So halfway through my pregnancy, some things came up. It just didn't work out for me to stay in the TBA program. In
Okay.
hindsight now, I think that it was the right decision.
Yeah.
Um, I love to serve, but I plan to serve in a different way. I love education. I've been an educator for 15 years, and that's something I'm really, really passionate about and will continue on my path. But for me, it was very much about this birth and being able
Mhm.
to strengthen my mind, really unlearn everything. Because when it comes
Yeah.
to free birth, radical
Love
birth,
that.
it's taking that trust back and putting it on yourself and taking that responsibility back
Mhm.
and saying, nobody else is responsible for my choices, for my body, my baby. It's the nutrition, it's what I put in my body, it's my spiritual state. I did a lot of work with a midwife. So I'd originally hired a midwife with the first pregnancy who was out of the
Mhm.
system. She had left during COVID, and obviously, like during COVID, I just saw everything that was happening. Going to the hospital for me was absolutely not an option unless it was an emergency. Quite
Yeah.
frankly, I became terrified of the system because, the way that they use it to kind of threaten you. I believe it's there for the right reasons
Mhm.
in many cases, but for me, it just was not an option. Like I said, unless it was medically necessary. So I got myself in the right mindset. I really unscrewed my brain from everything that I'd put in there before. The only thing that I did during my pregnancy was one ultrasound to
Mhm.
ensure that I didn't have a placental accreta because I felt that that was medically necessary to
Right.
ensure I didn't head down the same path because of a hemorrhage.
We were just having that
So I did that.
conversation. We were having a conversation at our last Radical Mother gathering last week. We were talking about
Mm,
ultrasounds. And they were like, Nessa, what do you think about ultrasounds? And I was like, unless you find a reason that it's like medically necessary, like there's a reason to get that kind of information, like I don't think they're beneficial.
yeah. It's always
So
weighing
yeah,
the
that makes a lot of
risks.
sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Always weighing the risks. And I always say that, for some people who feel that pressure of, well, if I'm going to have a radical birth or I'm going to have a free birth or I want to be as natural as possible, I cannot participate in anything. And I don't think that that's okay either. At the end of the day, you have to do what your heart is telling you and what your
Yeah.
mind is telling you. And I'm so grateful that I had that ultrasound. I was able to connect, I was in ultrasounds here are so different than in the States. In the States, they're like,
Mm,
it's like a show. And with my last one, I
mm,
can't even tell you how many ultrasounds because they bill out for it. And again, I didn't know. So it was every week the
yeah.
fear of, well, you could lose the baby unless we do an ultrasound. So it was like this weekly peep show. As where with
Mm,
this one, they don't tell you anything. They're measuring, they're doing this, they're doing that. So you think now your baby has every problem under the sun by the time that you leave. You're like anxiety ridden. Do I have a placental accreta? And you have to
mm,
wait till your doctor calls you. But it worked out and everything was perfectly fine. And we actually did find out the gender at that point, which we had not planned on doing. And I'm glad that we did because I like to plan. And I
yeah.
could connect her name, I could connect. It really was
Mhm.
special. So I was glad that I made that choice. We also hired two TPAs. I'd planned on maybe
Okay.
just hiring one, but again, because of my previous trauma, that was my limit. I wanted to
Mm,
ensure that I had somebody there just for extra support because I know I'm in it. I know my husband's emotionally in it. I knew
yeah.
my girls obviously are in a different position, and I wanted somebody there who had some extra skills that if something came up, they knew when to help me, make the suggestions with which herbs I take and, help to just bring me water so that my husband could fully enjoy the experience as well. Because honestly, I thought it was going to take like 3 days because
Yeah.
you just never know. That was my previous experience. So it was like, oh my goodness.
Hmm.
So I did hire them and I'm glad that I did. They were there to help with the Eldon cards afterwards with the blood typing and everything and there for emotional support. But everything happened so rapidly. So, September comes, my due date wasn't until actually October 13th. So it was Friday the 13th was my actual due date.
Okay.
And by the end of September, I started having contractions, and the contractions would be like 20 minutes apart. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this one's going to be early. This is amazing. Look at this.
Mhm.
Like, I'll get extra time off of work because I own a business. So I don't get a year off of work. I got 6 weeks. So
Yeah.
it's just a very, very different experience. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have this baby early. What turned into, contractions 20 minutes apart, they would, phase out, then they would come back a couple days later, then they would come back the next day, and then
Right.
so it almost seemed like it started being consistently every morning contractions 20 minutes apart for several hours, and then they would peter out. And everybody would be like, what's going on? Are you delivering? What's going on? Oh my gosh, are you close? And I realized I was still in my head. I was still very much in my head. So
Right.
I jumped on a call with the midwife that I had had with the first pregnancy that I had had the miscarriage. And she did a beautiful tapping and release session. And that was
Ooh.
exactly what I needed. I released, I cried, which is not super common for me. I tend to be that
Mm-hmm.
strong one who holds it all in. And
Yeah.
I needed that release. So this is now like flash forward. We're mid-October, past my due date at this point. I'd had all these crazy
Oh,
contractions. My parents were coming into
wow.
town. I was a bit nervous about my parents being here while I had her because they were here with my first delivery. And I know that you just feel like the pressure's on.
Yeah,
So
it's
I'm like, oh my
that
goodness.
like
I
it's also
love
those
my,
like like you feel like you need to host them, like there's another
yes.
part of you that's online
Well, I know my
instead of
husband would. My husband's like the best. He hosts he's so good with that. So I knew that was taken care of, but it's just more so, you have the baby yet? You have the baby, like my dad,
yeah.
baby yet? Any baby yet? What's going on? And he's so eager. Like second birth, he's rolling into the hospital with my big ball and he's like, okay, we're going to have a baby. I was like, okay, but now you got to go.
So cute.
Yeah.
Supportive,
So
but we
it's
need a personal space bet.
it is. Totally. So my parents arrive. At this point now, I'm like, okay, so she's got to come any day now. So I'm just going to release everything. This is out in the ether. She will come when she's ready to come. And if that's 2 weeks late again, because both of my first two were 2 weeks late and they were posterior babies, I was releasing it. I'm like, fine, whatever. So we went to Winners the day before. So this would have been October 18th now at this point. This is my sister's birthday. We went to Winners. We're walking around. My mom was doing some shopping because my parents live in California. So they were doing some shopping with my middle daughter. And this gal walks up to me. And at this point, I'm having like contractions again, 20 minutes apart. They're doing their thing. But I was
Yeah.
dealing with like a pretty intense one at this point. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting there. And this woman goes, are you in labor? I was like, I might be. I don't know. I've had prodromal labor. She's like, what's that? I'm a labor and delivery nurse. And I've never heard of that. I'm like, oh no, prodromal labor could happen
Ooh.
for like, a while before the baby comes. And she's like, oh, and your doctor let you out? I'm like, oh, I have a midwife. She's like, oh, who are you with? The midwife's in Newcastle. I was like, um, yeah, yeah, totally. Like, sure, whatever. Because now in my mind, again, COVID, CAS is coming after you. They want to take your kids. Like, it's just crazy, this response that you get.
Hmm.
So we finish up there. We get home. We go on this crazy long walk. And I'm just like, oh, well, nothing's going to happen. Wake up the next morning. Again, those weird contractions, but then nothing happened. And it was like, oh, okay, fine. Um, and then I said, you know what? Screw it. Let's go to Costco. So we're in Coburg. Costco's in Peterborough. So I'm like, let's just go to Costco. We need to stock up on some stuff anyway. It's
Yeah.
not too far. I'm making my list up. Everybody's getting ready. And this is like close to noon, I would say. Yeah, I'd say maybe close to noon. And all of a sudden I was like, whew, okay. Now these contractions are like coming really close. This is interesting. They're like different, they're intense. So that picture that I had taken that I think was on one of the posts that you had done,
Yeah.
that was like in between one of those crazy contractions that all of a sudden were coming like every 30 seconds, not 20 minutes. It just went boom. So I got upstairs. I maybe, no, so I guess, so my parents go to Costco, which was perfect because I'm like, awesome, I can work through some of this. They're gone. They have my middle one. My oldest is in her room. I don't know, like headphones on or something. I'm in here roaring like a lion through the intensity. And I can't even, it's so different. It's such a trip. My first two, it was painful. I was like, oh my gosh, it's
Mm.
intense. This one, it was intense. I was feeling into it. There was so much, I guess, from, that book, what is it called? I always get it wrong. Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage, Rachel Reed's book. I always say it
Mhm.
backwards. There was so much from her book that really walks you through feeling into your labor as opposed to letting it control you as a painful experience. My husband kept reminding me, like, relax your forehead because I tend to be very expressive. It was just
Yeah.
intense. It was so cool. It was just intense. So I'm like grabbing stuff between contractions in the bedroom. And within probably 20 minutes, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I think I'm actually in labor. Maybe we should go ahead and call Claire and
Yeah.
Rob. So I have my little contraction tracker because I'm so totally like A-type personality. I need
Yeah.
to know like contractions consistent. And they were like 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever. They were kind of in between. He gets on the phone with her and I think she listened to me. I don't really remember a lot of that part,
Yep.
but she goes, okay, I'm on my way. So this is like 2 o'clock now, I want to say. Um, so then I end up in the tub and I'm like just in my space. My daughter walked in at some point and she's like, what's going on? Why is mom growling? And Rob, my husband, goes, oh, mom's in labor. And she's like, oh my gosh. So she sat there with me and held my hand. And oh, it was just so, so sweet. And I just worked right through them. And by the time that Claire had got here, she goes, wow, okay, I think we're making some good progress. And at one point, so my husband was behind me, pressing on my back, kind of soothing me. The music was on in the background. I'd hired a birth photographer. Unfortunately, I think maybe somebody got sick or something right before, which worked out just fine. I just set up a little tripod because I really wanted
Okay.
those memories. I just think it's so beautiful to have.
Yeah.
So I set up a little tripod with the video so that when the time came, we could turn the video on. It started raining outside. I remember hearing thunder at some point. The time
Oh,
just went
Hazel.
so fast, and I was in such a zone that it was just those waves of intensity. And then in between, it was almost like I just rested.
Mm.
And I remember at one point, Claire maybe put a glove on or something just to assist. Like, obviously, with TBAs or anybody else, like, they're not the best thing about this birth. Nobody put their fingers in me. Nobody touched me. Nobody,
Amazing.
like, it was so, I just let my body do what it was supposed to do. At one point, I flipped over. I was like, do I have a purple line? Take a picture. I want to see this. Like, it was really kind of a cool experimental, after being with so many women at their births and just seeing the difference
Mm.
of the vibe and the feel. I was the one in control. It was me. So that was really
Mm.
cool. So my husband was really excited. He wanted to catch the baby. He was like, I want to catch her. I see myself in front of you. And of course, in my mind, I literally have this in my head where
It.
he's catching the baby. And I'm just like totally surrendering to it and relaxing, which is pretty similar to what had happened. TBA is a traditional birth attendant, so a doula with some extra skills, emergency skills, and things like that. It's beautiful. um, yeah, so by what, 6 o'clock, I basically, well, actually, I think maybe just before I started pushing, I was only pushing for, maybe 7 to 8 minutes, I would say.
Yeah.
And she just came right out. Like, it was
Wow.
crazy that moment. I just lifted her up and I was holding her and I'm like, oh, I think I was like, holy shit, like I did this, oh my gosh. And I was very, very vocal. And right before she came, they turned the video on. Sandy was there. She was giving me water, helping to nourish me. She called my girls in. She called my mom in. She made sure they didn't stand in front of the camera, which was awesome. She's like,
Mm.
enjoy, but don't
Yeah.
stand in front of the camera. It was so
Those little
beautiful.
things. things
It's
that are
just
so
all those little
supportive.
things that, when you're just there completely on your own. So while it is a radical birth, you still have beautiful support, which I love.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so she came out. I held her right up to me immediately, and I was holding her right after that because that was my only kind of, I don't even want to say fear. It was my only maybe elevated concern is postpartum hemorrhage because of my experience. So herbs
Yeah.
were a big thing for me, and Sandy knew that. She immediately grabbed the blends, started giving them to me, nourishing me. I think I had dates or maybe a honey stick. I don't remember.
Mhm.
I had my whole birth tray set up, like everything was ready to
I
go for
love that.
them. And then I have a little towel warmer in my bathroom. So they grabbed the towel, put it on Hazel. I got to hold her and just look at her. My mom was there. That was so special. That was a really, really cool connection. She came right as she came out, which was awesome.
Oh, cool.
So that was really special. And then they called my sisters in California, and it was kind of like,
Mm.
yay, after 15 years, I finally had my home birth that I wanted, that healing emotional birth. So it was really, really beautiful. We enjoyed it. And then it took an hour actually. It took an hour for me to deliver the placenta. I
Mhm.
think because I kind of got off track a little bit with getting on the phone and the excitement and all of
Yeah.
that. I wasn't as focused. And then I started realizing, I was like, oh my goodness, this is intense. Like this feels like am I having another baby? No, there was only one in there. Definitely only one. We saw the ultrasound. So then at that point they had suggested, they go, why don't we maybe move over to the toilet? Or maybe I think it was the birth stool first. I got on the stool and I was like, no, 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 no. So after an
Mhm.
hour, we went ahead and decided to cut the cord, and my husband got to do it. He got to enjoy sitting there with Hazel while I went over to the toilet. And immediately the placenta came out, which was great. We reviewed everything, looked at it, made sure that it was all intact, all the typical stuff, and literally went laid in bed, had a snack, enjoyed everybody being there. They weighed, my husband with Sandy's help weighed Hazel. We took little bets on the weight. She actually ended up weighing the same as my last one. So that was super exciting. And within, a couple of hours, everybody was gone and we got to snuggle. Like it was the most amazing,
Beautiful.
simple, boring, perfect birth ever. And it really came after 15 years of so much research, birth work, in and out, going back and forth. What do I do? Learning, unlearning, learning more, unlearning more,
Mhm.
tapping sessions,
Mhm.
emotional trauma release, like so much of it. And we just got this perfect, awesome birth. And my feet didn't even swell. Like the
Amazing.
first two, I looked like an elephant when I left the hospital. And I kept looking at my ankles and I'm like, my legs aren't even swollen. And I attribute a lot of that to my diet. I really, really focused on nurturing myself throughout the pregnancy. I had a girlfriend of mine who is also in a lot of birth work and was sharing a lot of her recipes with me, which was really
Mhm.
nice. And that was really helpful. And actually, she did my closing of the bone ceremony after, and I was forever grateful for
Oh,
that because I really felt like it was nurturing. It was
okay.
also really interesting to go through that experience and see, what I needed, what I felt. And it inspired me to start my own work on creating a pocket doula book that eventually I will release, not anytime soon, but really just additional doula support for doulas where you can't be there all the time for 20 or 24/7 questions. So it's something that they can guide them throughout
Mhm.
their pregnancy. And I really felt like for me, I had actually ordered something like that from Australia.
Yeah.
And it was just really helpful. It walked you through like every single day and gave little tidbits of information. And even being in this world, there's still things that come up where you're like, oh my gosh, is this normal? Is this okay?
Mhm.
And I think it was really helpful. I think that support was huge. My girlfriends all came out. They, were here to support me. My best friends came a couple days after. I did really try to focus on staying in bed after, which was very difficult for me to do.
Hard.
Especially with my parents here, and my parents like cook like soul food, traditional recipes that I love. So
Mhm.
that was really, really awesome. It was just a very special, amazing experience. And it really came from a place of love, and it came from putting that intention out there
Yeah.
and really building on that. And I think that that's so important. And I don't know, after all the years of, attending births, and somebody will just start off and they're like, well, I had an emergency C-section. And I always just think, let me guess. It started off like this and it went this, the catalyst of events. So I'm big on that education. I think it's so, so important. Empower yourself with um, all your different options. And at the end of the day, just ask lots of questions. And it really does come with a lot of radical responsibility. And I know it's not for everyone. And I know there are situations where babies don't make it, moms don't make it. There was an individual about a year before me that we had been in contact with that unfortunately didn't make it out of hers. And I took that hard when I was going through some of my emergency courses and I was going through certain
Yeah.
things. I would break down. I was so emotional about it because I thought, oh my gosh, like she never even got to hold her baby. It's just, oh,
Hmm.
it breaks my heart. But that is, this is the world that we live in. And
Yeah, there's risk
sometimes you
with
have to
everything.
trust the process. You have to trust your body, you have to trust your baby, that communication, and know that when something is up, to call that transfer. And that's where I think it's really important even though you might be free birthing, but have somebody else there who has an outside set of eyes, because in that moment I'm completely out of it. Like I'm so focused on birth that I'm not actually thinking about that. So having somebody else there to say, you know what, I think it's time to transfer. In my first daughter's case, it was necessary because her shoulder was stuck. Back then, I didn't know what that was. Now I know what that is. And she needed a manual movement, and that's what it was. But this time I was armed with those skills with the proper, emergency classes that I had taken. So it's really cool. It doesn't come, those decisions didn't just come from a place of, I just don't want to participate in the system or I just want to have a free birth because it's popular. It came from many, many years of education
Yeah.
and empowerment, which is cool.
Yeah, and desire and like manifesting it and calling it in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also really like how you what's the word, like admit yourself really well, and you're like, I'm a type A, like I gotta have my birth cart, which I also had a birth, like I had a birth closet. We took out
Yeah.
everything and it was all there labeled, like I get it. And so all kinds of different women can have the birth experience at home safely that they want, but maybe you just need to find what works for you, right? Like if that's
Absolutely.
what you need to feel
Absolutely.
confident,
Yeah.
you have that. Or if you, like in your case, you had a medical, uh, you had two medical experiences that were like, no, we want to tap into the system real quick to check this off for ourselves so that we can be calm and we can have less
Because it does. It
stress, which is
brings
really
a different vibe when you're hooked up to a machine. And again, it's not for everyone. Like I fully support women who feel that the hospital is the best place for them. I truly, truly do. I think that that's it's a very personal choice. And as long as it comes with that research and looking at the benefits and the risks and so forth, I think that's amazing. I think a lot of people also just leave it to their doctor to make all their decisions and they take no responsibility whatsoever. And then they say, oh, well, I ended up in this position, but they saved me. And I'm like, oh, geez.
yeah,
Okay.
we're
We have a long way
a
to
little
go.
bit rough.
We have a long way to go. That's where I'm like, you need a doula in the hospital. Everybody needs a doula. If you go to the hospital, 100% you need a doula. If you're
We
home, you
needed
need
it.
a doula. Like, you just need a doula. I used to say that to Lisa all the time. I'm like, everybody needs a doula. Like, there's everybody, regardless,
Yeah.
because in those moments, you need that additional support. Just a little tickle of a reminder to say, hey, remember we talked about this. Maybe it's something you want to ask. Because in
Hmm.
that moment, when you're hooked up to machines or you're, in a different place emotionally, you're not going to ask those things. And the poor husband or the spouse or significant other partner, they just want to be there to support you. And they're like, you're in pain. I don't want to see you in pain. You need to not be in pain. So I need to get you out of pain. How do we do this?
Yeah, and
And in the
doulas hold
hospital, it's that
space.
seduction of, ooh, we have drugs and we have this and we have that.
We can take
I
it
just
all
wish,
away.
I know.
Hmm.
I wish and pray that someday there will be more continuity and care and realize that birth is natural and normal. Maybe we'll have birthing centers. We'll have, OBs there for major medical situations. I really pray for this because right now the system is so broken. And like Billy Harrigan always says, birth is going to be the last thing to go in this system that's slowly falling apart. A lot of people
Hmm.
rely on the system to save themselves. It's that savior mentality, and nobody's here to save you. You have to change your nutrition, you have to change your mindset, you have to take
Yeah.
control, and you get what you want.
Yeah,
So
you
yeah, it
get
was a
what you
really
put
great
into it.
experience.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. And I think that's really cool that you did so much work with nutrition and it was supporting you in your fertility journey, but also throughout your pregnancy. I found that with my experience in pregnancy was when I was the healthiest version of myself.
Totally.
And I learned so much about yourself and like how foods feel in your body, how sugar impacts you, all of these things. It's such a teaching moment, pregnancy.
It is. It is. And if it's sometimes it'll just slam you down and you're like, oh my gosh, wait a second. Like, especially with my first pregnancy, where I guess it was halfway through my midwife. And of course, I had like a party every weekend. So I kept eating cake. And back then, like, I ate absolute garbage anyway. But she's like, you're like borderline gestational diabetic. You've got to like stop eating cake, especially prior to our appointments, because I'm going to have to transfer care.
That's
And that's
right.
the thing, too. Midwives are only able to do what they are able to within their restrictions as well. So when people say, well, I want this, well, they can't do that for you if you're not going to, meet them halfway and take care of yourself. So
Mhm.
it's really just kind of finding that middle point. And for me, I just didn't have to answer to anybody but myself. And I knew that if I caused something, obviously I would be really hard on myself. So I'm like, no, I have to eat proper. Don't get me wrong. I went for my weekend ice cream. I still enjoyed little things here and there, but usually I'd take a few bites and then hand it over to my husband because I couldn't handle anymore.
Yeah, have a little
But the
taste.
big thing was, starting your day with a good protein and very much an ancestral diet and focusing on, getting in that beef liver, whole nutrition. It was really, really
Mhm.
important to me, especially after the beginning of my pregnancy with this last one. I had like horrendous morning sickness, which now I also think may have been related to some mold exposure and some histamine response. So then I start diving down that whole rabbit hole of MCAS and histamine and,
Yeah.
your theanine levels being off and so many different things. But in that moment, the thought of taking like a B complex was like, I'm literally going to, I think I laid next to the toilet for about 8 weeks straight. I could
Oh,
not get off of the floor in the bathroom. It was that bad.
terrible. Yeah. Oh,
So
what a
it's
journey.
truly a labor of love, and it's a beautiful gift to be able to have, and a beautiful gift to be able to deliver your child right into your own hands. My husband didn't get to, unfortunately, catch her, but he was right behind me holding me up, and that was really beautiful. So I
Yeah.
feel very lucky for that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. It's
Yeah,
very inspiring.
oh,
I
for
love to
sure.
also hear how supportive your partner is. And like,
Yes.
yeah, it's a
I
great
encouraged
example
him
of,
for years. I'm like, you need to teach doula courses. That's what you need to teach because honestly, like he was the best, the absolute best in labor. I was very lucky for him.
amazing.
And postpartum
Okay,
too.
well, thank you for your time today, Holly. I hope
Thank
you have a
you,
good rest of your
Nessa.
day.
I appreciated you
And
as well.
yeah, we have more
Oh,
stories coming up, so tune into those. But for now, we'll say goodbye.
okay.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye, everyone.